Okay, so it's 2 p.m. UTC time, or what it says I like to call it, which means 4 p.m. Bulgaria time, which basically means that I'm going to start the third hangout on air about doing live icon design. And like I said in the description, this is going to be a hangout about tips and tricks when doing icons. Now, the first thing I'm going to start is the grid system. So I'm going to open Inkscape and switch to screen share mode, but first have to let the thing load. Okay, now I'm going to activate the screen share entire screen. Okay. Yes. Yep, it works. Anyway, what's a grid? And why do we need a grid? Well, why do we need a grid is actually a question with a really easy answer. Basically, pixels are square. Well, I actually call them squared bastards, but that's a totally different story. Anyways, pixels are square, so all your monitor is divided in tiny, tiny, tiny little squares. And if you don't follow the edges of the squares, your icon or any other graphical object, it doesn't have to be an icon, it could be a image or anything else that's basically graphical, will get blurry looking, which is why we need to align to grid. What's a grid in Inkscape? A grid in Inkscape is basically a virtual representation of the pixels. So you can see where the pixels are, at least virtually, and align to them. Now, what do you need for grid? What you actually first need, no, you don't need that, but I'm going to do it just in case. I like squared sizes. I'm going to zoom in a bit, but that's irrelevant to the grid thingy. Yep, now I'm going to zoom a little bit more. Yep, that's good enough. Now I'm going to activate the grid. You can do that by pressing, I am pretty sure that's called hash in English, which kind of confuses Bulgarians because we call hash what in English is called the H letter, or we also call it hash just like in Germany. And if you want to call it the Bulgarian way, that's a diez sign. Anyway, you activate the grid either by pressing that button or from the View Grid menu. And what you can see here are a bunch of squares. And these squares are actually your virtual pixels. Now, in order to demonstrate what will happen if we don't align to a grid, I'm going to create a random object, like let's say like this. It's going to be some random sizes like 46 point something 0.5 to 73.5, for example. It doesn't really matter. And we're going to let it not align, so it's going to be at no, we can actually make that bigger, so 105 or 107 146.5. Now I'm going to move it just so it's not aligned to a grid. Just make me sure it's not aligned. Now I'm going to make it 100% opaque. The color doesn't really matter. And if you zoom in, you see the squares actually get smaller. That's because the pixels are really, really tiny. So at bigger zoom level, you get to see smaller pixels, which means they will get tinier. Now, yep, and even at on this zoom level, you can see that this is definitely not aligned to a grid. I'm going to save that as, for example, in documents, yeah. And are not aligned. And then I'm going to align that. So I'm going to remove this and this, make it a perfect square. And do that. And that's basically an unaligned object. For example. Now I'm going to open both in Nautilus. Where were they? Yep. And now you won't actually see that in this size because this is 200 by 200 and the thumbnails here are, I believe, uh, 64 by 64. But anyways, even if you look closely, even at this size, you see that this, which is actually the aligned one, is much less blurry than this one. I can demonstrate with a 48 pixel, which is going to be better. So I'm going to make that 48. I didn't mean 38. Sorry. And I'm going to make that 31.5 to 26.5. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to zoom in a tad. Now it's going to get automatically aligned to grid because I've enabled the grid, which is a pretty cool feature. So I'm going... Oh, we can actually remove these 5s and make it unaligned like this. We are going to save it as not aligned /o-s and and now we are going to align that. So we are going to remove the unalignment, aligned as. And now at this size you can clearly see, I'm not sure if you can clearly see it on Hangout quality, but anyways, if you try that on this size especially, you see how the not aligned object, this one, is actually looking blurry on the edges, and the aligned object looks perfectly crispy clean. And that, folks, is why you should always align to a grid. It's extremely important because you don't want to do a blurry icon. Now, speaking of blurry icon, I'm going to show you another really cool trick. For example, I'm going to show you the fake way to do a blur in Inkscape. I'm going to open one more Nautilus window. I could have used the tab, but yeah, too little too late for that. Yeah, I'm going to my new final. Yep, I'm going to open that. Yeah, lots of sizes in here. If I open that with no, I should actually just, yeah, I'll do that. Square 48 apps. Now I'm going to open both SVG files with Inkscape. Let's say we're going to use that one. It doesn't really matter which size. And we are going to use that one. Now, I have to go back to ta. Now, this is the new Kazam icon I made a long time ago, but anyway, that's irrelevant here. What I want to draw your attention to is that if I zoom in now, it's obviously going to get a little bit blurry because that's 256 PNG. I could export it to a bigger size, but that doesn't really matter here. Is that below the white lens, I don't think it's actually pure white, but that is irrelevant here. There's this blur. Now, there are basically two ways you can do that. This is the original SVG file. And with some luck, I might even be able to select the blur. But if I'm sure if I'm able to do that. Yep, here, that's the blur behind the white lens, which, yep, it's not pure white, I knew it. Now I have to select the blur again. Yep, here it is. And as you can see, that's actually a real-life Inkscape vector blur. Now, I would advise you to avoid that if you can, because there's some funny little issue or bug, if you want to call it this way, that the blur doesn't look good on SVG files when they're shown in the file manager or in your dashboard or menu or whatever. So this is the SVG file of this is the PNG file of the icon with the real life blur, and this is the SVG one. Or this one doesn't really matter because they're basically, this is 256 and this is 128. Anyways, as you can see on the SVG file, the blur looks kind of displaced and way too dark. That's some sort of a bug or issue with Inkscape, I'm not sure what, but that's why I'm trying to avoid using blur. And as you can see, the lenses effects on the lens, the lightning, the light balls, or whatever you want to call them, don't look as good as on the PNG file. They're also real life blur. Now, in order to avoid that, you can use a nice little trick called radial gradient, or radiant. I apologize about that. What a radiant gradient is, I first have to ungroup. Yeah, clipping got messed up, but that doesn't really matter here. Oh, sorry. Accidentally clicked on the wrong tool. Anyways, this is actually a gradient. As you can see, there's no blur here, but if I show you the icon, it actually looks blurry. Well, you can tweak that to not be 100% opaque and add some colors and stuff like this. That's basically nitpicking. But anyways, using this effect, you can recreate a blur to a certain extent. If I delete the shadow, you can see that there is the same outline shadow around the white in quotes, because it's not actually white outer lines, but it's actually a radiant or radial gradient. Now, how do you do a radiant gradient? I'm going to delete that. What you need is to actually duplicate the object. Make it bigger. In this case, we're going to make it 26 pixels. The original object is 24 by 24. You're going to move it down. Make it black. Move it to the, oh, not that much to the bottom. It needs to be, yep, like this. Now, what you need to do is go to Fill, which you are in if you've made it black. Don't add a stroke. You don't need a stroke. Go to select a radial gradient. And that's basically it. You can make it more black if you wish by making that number between 0 and 255, but I enjoy actually using the first at 255 and the second at 0. Now if you want to add more blur, you just duplicate that and move it, and you can repeat that until you have the desired amount of blur. And that's basically it about this. It's a really neat trick if you want to emulate blur with. Now I'm going to close all of that. So basically that was it about blur and grading, but there are more tricks I would like to show you. Now I'm going to show you how to do an inset shadow. Now I don't know I explained that in the previous tutorial, but it's still a really cool trick. So I'm going to close that. I'm not going to close this one yet because I'll need it to show you something later on. Repos, Numix folders, for example. Now, first thing first, I need to show you what an inset shadow is. I'm going to open that. Blue or red? Well, let's say blue in this case. It doesn't really matter which icon I will open. Now, oh, perfect. The zoom level is absolutely brilliant for this. Oh, I moved it. Sorry. Uh, Anyways, what an inset shadow is basically a shadow inside the object. It's not outside as in the blur shadow I showed earlier a few seconds ago, but it's inside the object. What it's used for is basically to add a false 3D effect. Now, as you can see, this is the icon with the inset shadow, and it looks 3D because of the inset shadow. Now, if I remove them like this, it just looks plain. I'm going to save it just in case to show you the difference. That's the icon with the inset shadow, and that's the icon without the inset shadow. Oi, bloody hell. Yep, that's better. Anyways, the inset shadow, as I showed, does make the icon look a bit more 3D. Now, I'm going to show you how to do an inset shadow. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to go back to my file, create a 30 by 30 rectangle, align it in the center, and I'm going to color it in something. Oh boy, that's really mainstream blue. And now we're going to do an inset shadow. Now there are different types of inset shadow depending on the geometry. You can do it at the top, you can do it at the top right, top left, bottom right, and etc. etc. I'm going to demonstrate just two types: top left and just top. So what you need is actually an object. Yep, that's an object. As you can see, that's a circle. And what you need first is to duplicate that. So you select the object, you press Ctrl plus D. Now, what you need is to color that black, at least for the tutorial sake. Now you should duplicate the black object again. Move that the amount of pixels you want the inset shadow to be. So if I move it from 9 to 7, the inset shadows will be 2 pixels, for example. Now, I'm going to paint that white just so there will be enough or something like this, enough contrast for us to be able to select both layers without going through wibbly mouse clicking process. Now, you select firstly the object, the second duplicated object, not the black one, but the one after it, should be on top. You select that, just left click, then you hold shift, you select the black object too. Now you should not hold shift anymore. Now you go to path difference, and that's basically your inside shadow. Now you can do it 10%, 20%, 50%, or whatever number you would like to do it. And now we are going to repeat the procedure, but with a shadow on the top left. Now, the process is basically pretty much the same. You still have an object, just a single object. As you can see, there is nothing behind it. You need to duplicate that again, make that black, or yellow, or any other color you would like, but I make it black just so the contrast will be really high with the second duplicated object. Now you select the black layer, you make it black again, you duplicate it again, you color it with different color, and now you move it just like that. Now there's a bit of a trick here. Now, because you move it to both direction, in this case bottom and right, the inside shadow will get twice as fat. Now, if you want that to be not that fat, you should lower the amount of moving. So we started from 9. If we move it with the arrows on the keyboard, it will actually go to 11 and 7. But if you want a tinier shadow, we can move it that to 10 and to 8 like this. And now you repeat the procedure. You select the second duplicated layer, you select the black one, with shift, you do path difference, and that's basically your inside shadow, which amount you should lower like this. And that's basically it for the inside shadow. Now there's another cool trick about them. Now, because they're usually transparent and they are not that much opaque, you can actually break the grid. You can cut at, it doesn't have to be, it can be 7, I didn't mean 17, and okay, that's a bad idea. For example, like this, if you want to be a little bit of the centric, that's not going to be actually visible with the broken grid. Now I'll show you why the grid will get broken, path difference, and I'm going to make it 50%. Oh, not white, black. And as you can see here, the grid is actually a bit broken. But like I said, this is a transparent object, and that doesn't really matter. It won't be visible and it won't look that blurry. So when it comes to inside shadows, you could break the grid. It's not that important in them. And sometimes, mind you, it does look better with broken grid. Okay, oh, sorry about that. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is actually how to draw a shadow around an icon. Now, there are two ways to do that. So I'm going to open icons. I need to open Numix work. Where's that? Android Numix calc icons. Oh god, that was you remember that one? That was the first Numix calc icon we made. Okay, I might need that later on. Now, as I was saying, I'm going to show you how to do a shadow around an icon. Now, the first and the obvious way is to use a blur. Now, like I said earlier, when you use blur, you have to be prepared for your icons to not look as good as they look in Inkscape, in your file manager, or your dashboard, or etc., unless you export to PNG file. Now, as you can see, this is the SVG file of the calc3 icon with the blur. As you can see, the blur is at the top right, and it doesn't look as good as the PNG file. Basically, the PNG file is just the exported SVG file. There's no difference between them. But as I said, the blur simply looks better on the PNG file. Now, in order to do that type of blurry shadow, what you need to do is basically really simple. Select the background shape. There's a shadow layer. Oh, brilliant. I've made myself a fake shadow here, just in case. But I've decided to go with the blur one. So, as I was saying, I'm going to move that shadow. I'm going to move that back where it was. Now, what you need is to duplicate the object on which you're going to apply the shadow. So, you select it, Ctrl plus D. Now, what you need is to actually color it black or blue or whatever color you want the shadow to be. Then you move that to the bottom with the lower selection to bottom 2. It's not going to be visible now. As you can see, it's not visible, so don't unmark it, please. And then you add some blur. For example, this is going to be 100. Okay, that's a lot. That's actually going to be like 5 pixels and 100%. And now you have to save that. Let's say I'm going to save it in documents again. Yep, that's double name. Yep, that's a brilliant name. And then you have to export it because, like I said, the blur won't look as good. And you're going to your documents and you name it exactly the same brilliant way. And then you can see your creation with the blur shadow if you go to the folder where you have saved it. Yep, as you can see, that's the SVG file and that's the PNG file. And that's basically how you create a blur shadow around an object. And now I'm going to show you how to create a not blur shadow. I'm going to open my Kazam icon again. Okay, and I'm going to open the PNG file. Now, if you look, there's actually a bit of shadow below and around the base plate light gray background. Now, the shadow is not as strong as blur one because I didn't make it as strong, and it's not actually a blurred shadow. Now, how do you do this? Well, that's actually extremely tedious. If I zoom in, that's the SVG file of the same icon. Now, the zooming will take a while because there are lots of blurred objects in this icon. These 3 objects here are actually the shadow. How you create that one? Well, I'm going to show you just now. So, let's go back to our test circle object. Now, what you need is to actually duplicate that like this. So basically now you have 2 copies. Now you have to make it bigger than the stock image size, stock object size. So we are going to make it 30.5. Now you have to center it. How you center it is that's easy. You do the math. We have a 48 pixels SVG file minus 30 point. I have to check the Hangout, sorry, just in case it went haywire. Minus the object size which we want to center, divided by 2. And that makes 8 8.75. Now, if you are good at math, you can do that manually. I suck at math, so I use the great inventions known as calculators. And now you can make it, let's say, 20% opaque and move it to the bottom. And that's actually the first object of the shadow. Make sure it's on the bottom, not on top. We don't want to darken the original objects, but at the bottom. Now you duplicate that again. You make it, let's say, 31. Then you go back here. You do the math again. 8.5. Now, you move that to the bottom again. You make it less opaque than the shadow. The first was 20, so we're going to make that 10. Now, these are cherry-picked numbers. You may use other numbers, but I just picked this for tutorial sake. Now, what follows is actually really important. Now, usually there's a cutting process in which you have to remove the duplicates in the shadowing, but that's not to be done yet. Basically, firstly, you need to do all the layers of your shadow. We are going to create a third layer. We are going to make it 32. We are going to do the math again. Oi, yep, there's Control plus Z for anything. 8. You move that to the bottom. Now, the object should be aligned in this way. The layer on the top is the original object. Then below it is the darkest part of the shadow. Then below the darkest part is the middle part, and below the middle part is the lightest part, which is going to be 5% opaque. Now, what follows now is actually the cutting process. Now, the cutting process should always cut first at the lightest part of the shadow. This is the lightest part, which is 5% opaque. What you need to do is relatively simple. You duplicate the middle layer. You select that duplicated copy. You hold Shift. You select the lightest bit. And then you do path difference. Now, after that is done, as you can see, this is actually lighter. Now, the reason it's lighter is because we duplicated the circle, and the circle doesn't go from here to here. It goes from here to all the way down to here, so you get a duplication of 1 times 5, 1 times 10, and 1 times 20. Now, we are going to remove the duplication from the 10 layer, 10% opaque. Now, you duplicate the bottom one, the darkest layer. I apologize about that. It's not the bottom one, it's the top one when it comes to the shadow. Then you hold Shift, you select the 10 layer, path, difference, and that's basically your shadow. Now, if I move them, as you can see, that's just an outline. If I move that, that's just an outline. If I move that, that's a complete circle, but that doesn't really matter because it goes behind the original objects. Now, if I want to make the original object transparent, that's way too transparent. Like, I'm going to make it 75%. This dark 20% opaque circle is going to create issues. So you have to cut it. So you repeat the procedure. Duplicate, select, add, difference. And if I select that, that's also an outline. I can save that as now the numbers here are cherry picked, so it may not look as good, but basically, as you can see, you have a shadow. Now, if I remove all the shadows and save it like this, ns from no shadow, as you can see, that's actually a plain circle, and that's a circle with shadow. Now, I know that's extremely tedious process, and you may want to do I know, not 3, but 5 or 6 or 7 layers of shadow, but that's basically the only way I know to do it. It's extremely tedious, but if you want to avoid blur, well, you have to get your hands dirty. So that's basically it about the shadow. Now let me make sure that's actually broadcasted on the Google Plus page because I'm not. Oh, okay, it's broadcasted. That's good because I don't want to blow that again like the last time when my web browser crashed and everything went haywire. Now, for a little bit, I'm going to go back to the Inside Shadows places. Now, the Inside Shadows may not be used only to create a Faux 3D effect. When you use huge Inside Shadows, they do that, but if you use small Inside Shadows, they create other cool effect. Oh, blimey, I haven't copied my new folders here. Well, I have to do that. But anyways, uh, this is our new folder icons, and if you look here, this is also an inset shadow. If you look at the SVG file, this shadow is basically barely visible and it doesn't create a Faux 3D effect. It creates just some cool, nice, very little 3D, more like in-depth effect of the icon. You can use the inside shadows for that too. They are very useful when it comes to such stuff. So don't just use them to create 3D objects. They're used for adding subtle, in-depth effect, which is really nice. Now I'm going to do the icon anatomy part and explain you layers. So let me make sure I have everything opened. Yep, brilliant. Now I'm going to open that bloody multimedia player icon I've been working on, which is basically extremely, utterly annoying icon. Now I'm going to first explain you what are layers. Now layers in all graphic editors are basically different levels of where you put your objects in. Well, that was my best descriptions, which kind of sucked. But anyways, layers are extremely useful when it comes to organizing your objects. Now, why are they extremely useful? Let's just say I'm going to uh, make that icon without layers. So I'm going to make the same icon. That's I'm not going to add shadow here, that's irrelevant. I'm going to make it without layers. Now I'm going to doubly copy that. 9.5 by 20. 9, 20. Now, this is basically the multimedia player without the layers. Now, let's say we want to add the usual Numix circle shadow. If I go back to the layers image, what I just have to do is basically be a symbol layer. Press Ctrl plus A like this, then Ctrl plus Z to duplicate, then objects group, and then just move it, oh yeah, where I want it to be. Like this, make it black. 10%, and then move it to the bottom. Now, if I want to try this again at this icon, there are no layers here, as you can see, there is just layer 1. If I press Ctrl plus A and press Ctrl plus Z to duplicate, and then do object group, and then paint everything black, as you can see, I also duplicated the base plate because the base plate is on the same layer 1 as the symbol. And that, folks, is why layers are useful. Let me go back to the layer image. So basically, layers are useful when you want to add shadow, for example, because In this case, the symbol layer is the layer that's containing the symbol. If we press Ctrl plus R to duplicate the symbol, for example, to do stuff with it, it's going to be all we're going to select is just the symbol. We're not going to select the base because that's on different layer, or the shadow. So that's why you should always use layers. If you're doing a complicated icon, well, icons are not that much complicated, but they're very complicated. And when you do more complicated stuff, you should always use layers in order to have that flexibility. So, how do you do a layer? Well, basically, you go to Layer menu, Layers, and then from here you can organize your layers. You have the shadow layer. What the shadow layer is basically just that shadow on the bottom right of the icon. Now, because we are not going to touch that like never ever, we are going to make that lock. So as you can see, the icon indicates that it's locked. What you have later on the top of the shadow layer is the base layer. The base layer is basically the base plate, which is 46 by 46 on 1 on X and Y axis circle with the inside shadow on the right. And then you have the symbol layer. The symbol layer is basically everything that's about the symbol. And that's an anatomy of a circle icon. But before I proceed to anatomy of square icon, I know I have explained that in the previous tutorials, but that's actually very important, especially if you're going to do as icons. Well, yeah, that was actually a shameless plug, but yeah, if you want to do as icons, ping us on IRC, ping Mechuswap there. It's spelled with 4 because, yeah, Slavonic stuff I don't want to get into. Anyways, I need to explain the shadow again, like in the previous two tutorials. Shut up about that, I'm not going to stop. Anyways, the shadow on the circle icon points at the bottom right. Why, you would wonder? Well, the reason why it points to the bottom right is because both the inside shadow and the drop shadow points to the bottom right. It would be stupid if we make that shadow point to the left or just to the bottom. We will actually break the geometry pretty badly, which is what we don't want to do. Now I'm going to the other folder. Blimey, that file manager is, the poor little file manager is getting really complicated. I'm going to open, let's say, the redshift icon. Okay, that's the redshift icon. Now, we're going back to the layer menu, from which you can add layers and rearrange layers, or remove layers, or do everything layers related. I don't know why that's so tiny to use scroll bar, but whatever. Now, the square preset basically uses the same naming of the layers. You have the shadow, which is basically, okay, I have to scroll this super, okay, you won't see it here, but you will see it here. This extremely subtle shadow on the bottom of the icon. Then you have the background layer. What the background layer is actually a rounded rectangle with an inside shadow at the bottom. That's the rectangle and that's the inside shadow on the bottom. And that's the symbol layer. The symbol layer is like in the circle preset, everything about the symbol. Now, as you can see, the shadow here is just one, I don't know how to call it because it's not a pixel. It's just one arrow down to the bottom. It's not to the bottom right like this. It's just to the bottom. Now, the reason why it's just to the bottom is because the inside shadow and the drop shadow point just at the bottom. They don't point at the bottom right or the bottom left. They just point at the bottom. So in order to not break the geometry here, it has to point to the bottom. And that's anatomy of a square icon. I'm going to talk a bit more about layers. Okay, I don't need that one, and I don't need that one. Okay, that one may be useful later on, if there's actually a later on. Now, I'm going to open my Kazam icon. Now, as you can see, there are no layers here. Yep, there are no layers. I made that without layers, like a bloody idiot. Like, there are no layers, there's just one layer. So, if I zoom in, let's say, for example, what should I do? Let's say, for example, I want to tweak the blur objects, the blur object. Now, what I have to do is move the blur object is the shadow around the lens. Now, what I have to do is basically start moving objects around like this and this and this and etc. until I get to the blurred objects, which is extremely tedious. Now, if I had the blur objects all that in a layer called blur, I could just hop onto that layer from the layer menu and do whatever I want to that. So this icon is actually pretty complicated. It's not the most complicated icon I've ever done by a mouse, but still it's fairly complicated. And like I said, when it comes to complicated icons, please arrange everything you can in layers just to make so your life easier when you want to modify things. Otherwise, you have to move objects around and then rearrange them, which is basically extremely, utterly tedious. And pretty much the last thing, Christ, I can't actually say te and ha one after another, is basically a really neat gradient effect at that icon. Now, in order to do that, I have to make it that doesn't really matter the name. As you can see now on the right of that icon, there's this orange gradient, which on the left of the icon. On the right of the icon, we have absolutely the same orange gradient, but 20% opaque. Now, this is basically just doing visual stuff and adding a bit of polish on the icon. But if I go back and remove both of the orange layers like this, and then save this as something that doesn't really matter, as you can see on the edges, the icon is actually much plainer than the icon with the greenish orange overlays. Now, how are these overlays actually made? Well, that's actually pretty simple. What you need to do is firstly uh, make a rectangle like this. Then you have to remove all the roundness just in case. Now the color here doesn't really matter. Then you have to select that background. You select the background because you want the rectangle to cover only the background, not do a overlay over the shadow. That would be stupid. Then you select both. The background should be on the top. Then you do part intersection. And as you can see, if I move that, and that, and if I move it to the bottom, they're basically absolutely overlapping objects. I'm going to go back with that where it was. Now, as you can see, that's actually a gradient from some greenish orange to transparency. Now, this is not a radiant gradient, this is plain linear gradient. So, we don't need a stroke, you just need a fill. You make the fill not flat color, but you make it linear gradient. And then you select the color you want. I'm not sure what color I've used here, but basically it's just something like this, for example. And then you lower the opacity. And it's pretty much identical to this one. It could be a bit different because I don't actually recall the exact color. Well, it's 6357 or FRF. And what I pick here is actually 5B, 5F27, but that doesn't matter. And that's pretty much it about this effect. It's really cool if you want to tone up and color in a very subtle way and add some cool, nice effect on the icon. Now, and really the last thing I want to show you is the color codes in Inkscape. I'm going back here. Now, as you can see, that's an usual 6-hex color code. We have F1 for A, and then on the right you have 2 double Fs. What they indicate you want? Well, that's actually a transparency. If I remove the 2 double Fs, as you can see, the color actually gets absolutely utterly transparent. If I say A, it will be 238 out of 255. So basically, if you want to adjust that, you can adjust it with these 2 digits at the right. Basically, it's usually easy, at least for starters, to adjust via that control, but if you ever get to a pro level, you can adjust via that Fs on the right. And I believe I am no, I'm not actually down. Now, I almost forgot to outline very important thing. What tools we use when it comes to creating a circle. Now, we obviously use the mouse tool, with which we can move stuff or make it like some different size. We also use the path tool. Now, what the path tool actually allows you to do is, let's say we create something like this and do, now, this is the path tool, which basically means your object has to be a path. Now, I just create an object with this tool, create rectangle tool, so it's the rectangle tool, but that actually doesn't create a path, that creates just an object, so we need to make it a path. So you go to the path menu, object to path, and then you select the path tool, and you can do stuff like this. Then you can add curves, for example. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to add one unless I actually select. Yep. For example, you can add a curve. Now that's actually extremely faulty curve, but that doesn't really matter right here. And you can do other stuff like add a dot in the middle or remove a node. All these objects are called nodes. You can add a node. You can remove a node. You can straighten. You can add auto smooth and stuff like this. Basically, the path tool is extremely powerful. Granted, it's actually quite tedious to use, but it's still extremely powerful. Next thing we use is basically the rectangle tool to create rectangles, the circle tool to create circles or ellipses. Like you see, that's actually an ellipse, so it's 13 by 16. A circle would be 16 by 16. Bezier tool, that's actually a drawing tool. So you can actually draw yourself a rectangle. Okay, yeah, you can make it curve on the fly, but I prefer curving them. For example, yep, that's a rather nice rectangle. You can fill it. Now, there's the really useful thing here that object is basically a path, so you can do everything you want with that path. You don't have to do path object to path. That object created with the Bezier tool is actually straight for the path. Then you can use the paint bucket tool. That's the edit gradients tool, which allows you to edit your gradients. And that's the pick color tool, which you can use to pick colors. That's the text tool, which you can type silly things like your name Georgi or whatever. But then again, when it comes to texts are not automatically aligned to grid. So if I go to that make it some color on which the grid is actually visible. As you can see, it's slightly not aligned to grid. So when you do a text on icon, always make sure it's aligned to grid. And you can use the rubber tool. Where was that? Yep, to remove an object if you're too lazy to select it and press delete. And there's the spray tool, which you can use to make sprays and stuff like this. And these are basically all the tools we use in Numix. Oh, and there's the free drawing curve tool, which you can use to create something like this, which is a technique we used in our Numix icon team circle, Numix circle, 40 tabs. I believe it was my paint icon, if I'm not mistaken. Just let me make sure. Yep, that's actually our my paint icon, and we use that free drawing tool to create that. And oh Christ, that icon kinda sucks with that background, so we have to fix it, but that's actually irrelevant to this tutorial. No, the icon doesn't really suck. The colors of the sheet and the brush and the background are actually pretty bad. But anyways, this was pretty much the last thing I wanted to show in this tutorial, and I am unsure if there will be a third part of the tutorial, fourth part, because I pretty much showed you everything you should know. So I won't give any promises there will be more tutorials next week or the week after that. And I should probably turn my webcam on. Okay, that was stupid. I should disable the screen share. Anyways, like I was saying, this was basically the last tutorial of this kind, and I can't promise there will be more tutorials. If we think of any useful to make a tutorial for a Hangout, we'll do one, but I can't give any promises. Lastly, I want to speak about the Q&A. Now, a few weeks or maybe a month ago, I'm not sure, we asked you if you want us to do a Q&A. Now, we haven't decided to when to schedule that, but basically by some time, so monitor our Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter. Here we will even post on Reddit and etc. etc. We will announce some hour for Q&A. Now I can't give you an exact date. It may be in a month away or 2 months away from now. It may be well, not tomorrow. Tomorrow is Saturday. But anyways, by some time there will be a Q&A. Now, like I said, I can't give you a date. Just monitor our social feed, and you will get the date by some lovely day in which we decide to schedule that. And I think I am pretty much finished for this tutorial, so I guess I will see you, well, you will see me most likely the next time there's a hangout on there from the Numix site. So basically, bye-bye till the next time, which I don't know where will that be and when. So bye-bye.